Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today on Tag Tuesday. It was created by Dalton Gentry over at Stripcover Lit, who also tagged me. I have to admit, Dalton was looking a little tired in his video, but that is kind of what happens when Steve is slowly but steadily sucking the life force out of you. You tend to look a little tired. This is the BookTube Endgame Tag, a kind of a nod to Avengers Endgame, which is now north of $2 billion after 2 weeks. That's astonishing, just astonishing. And the movie is worth every one of those dollars. The more I think about it, the more times I rewatch it. I have a screener that I waited weeks to watch it so that I could watch it at the same time as everybody else. And the more I watch it, the more amazed I am by it. The risks it takes, the smartness of it all, and the emotional heft, which you don't expect. And I am a connoisseur, in a way. I'm a geeky connoisseur of great geeky moments, sequences, not moments, but sequences in science fiction and fantasy movies. I'm a connoisseur of them. Science fiction, fantasy, action, that sort of thing. Anything in that, roughly that category. A set piece sequence. I'm a connoisseur of those. I've got a long list of them that I love. Probably, for personal reasons, my favorite one of all, beautifully executed, is the stealing the Enterprise sequence from Star Trek 3. I have seen it I don't know how many times. I could watch it endlessly without getting tired of it. But there are plenty of others. Plenty of others. I would even go so far as to include the gigantic epic fight sequence from Kill Bill, even though that's not actually fantasy or science fiction. You know what I mean. It's that kind of a thing. And, of course, the Ride of the Rohirrim from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. And also, while we're talking about Peter Jackson, another sequence that is absolute genius and doesn't get the credit that it deserves is King Kong versus the two T-Rexes in the King Kong movie by Peter Jackson. But there are plenty of others. There are plenty of others that I just love. And there is such a sequence at the end of Avengers Endgame. It was a thrill to watch. It was a thrill to watch it and know that. Because, oddly enough, considering, how intensely visual a creation the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been, in my opinion, the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't give us many of those sequences. They're a thing unto themselves. And when I was watching that for the first time, I was really like, oh my God, this is a great movie, but that is a great sequence, and you're not going to see. I was thinking, I haven't seen that in many of these movies, but that is the tag is a kind of a nod towards Avengers Endgame in a Dalton-esque way, because at the end of the previous Avengers movie, the bad guy Thanos has gathered together all of these cosmic stones into one gauntlet that gives him unlimited power over space, time, energy, matter, and he has a plan in mind. He knows what he wants to do once he has all that power. He wants to snap his fingers. It's an iconic thing from the comic books, an iconic moment. It doesn't have to be. It could be clapping his hands, but the snap of the fingers with the glove on is a classic moment from the comics that is now immortal. Only a tiny handful of basement-dwelling nerds knew about it in the comics. Now the whole world knows what a Thanos snap is. And he has a plan that once he has all that power, he will snap his fingers and immediately cause half of all living things in the universe to disappear. To sort of clean things out, to increase the amount of resources for everybody. It's a perfect villain motivation because he believes that it's not villainous. And the theme of this tag is a kind of elimination match that goes on down the line of the questions, sort of along the lines of doing the same thing. And I love it. I'm a little sorry that these tags seem to be draining Dalton, but that's the price you pay to keep Steve happy. Right? So let's just crack on with the tag. This is the BookTuber Endgame Tag. And question number 1 is paperback or hardback? As in terms of your favorite format, I now go for a hardcover because they're more durable. And that wasn't once upon a time a concern because once upon a time paperbacks were correspondingly cheap. so I didn't care whether or not they were durable. Now I do care, and also now that is my primary concern, because with most of the books that I get, not to sound like the world's biggest ponce, but most of the books that I get now I don't pay for. So now I care about the durability of the format. So I would go with hardcover for this. Although, once again, not to harp on my same old rant, but if the publishing industry changed in the way that I believe it absolutely should, if it changed to something closer to the UK model, where the vast emphasis was on, for new books, was on a nice sturdy paperback edition, and hardcovers were printed in a very limited supply for collectors and libraries, I would definitely applaud that. I would definitely applaud that. And not only that, but so would book readers. The industry would right now, book buyership, readership numbers are abysmal. If you know how to read, if you know how to read graphs and charts correctly, the numbers are abysmal. They are going down, and have been going down for a long time. But buyership is also going down, and that would change immediately. That would change overnight if the model for selling books changed as well, so that you weren't giving authors $1.1 million of an advance for a first book. In other words, a total gamble on everyone's part. You've just got caught up in spending money on bidding for it. That is not responsible business. And even if you have an established author, a nice big healthy paperback print run with a few hardcovers here and there for completists, collectors, and libraries. Give the reading public the chance to buy a $15 paperback of an author as opposed to a $35 hardcover, and of course they will do it. And you might think, well, publishers certainly think, well, we want the higher price tag per item, per unit shipped. But that is, in my opinion, that is faulty thinking, because what difference does it make if the per unit price tag is higher if only a third of the number of people are actually paying that price? Decrease half or more that price, and your audience, your paying audience, will be much bigger. Anyway, question number 2, science fiction or fantasy? I'm not 100% sure that Dalton didn't put this question on here just to tweak me, because one of our original disagreements a long time ago that still stays true is that I don't believe there is any useful distinction between those two things. Science fiction and fantasy both posit a completely internally consistent alternate reality. And they're the only genres that do. And they do it in the exact same way. As like I've said many times, if you are in the middle, if you're a character in a novel and you travel faster than the speed of light, it doesn't really matter to me whether it's a faster than light tachyon drive or an incantation spell from a wizard that gets you to do that. I think they're opposite sides, two sides of the same coin. A completely, hopefully well thought out, internally consistent, alternate world where alternate rules of physics apply. But if I go by the normal distinction, that most people don't think that way. If I go by the normal distinction, I think I would probably side with Dalton and pick fantasy. I love science fiction, absolutely love it. I've read so much of it for so long, but the great works of fantasy that I've read somehow strike me better. I mean, Dalton goes for the obvious example, and it's obvious for me too. The Lord of the Rings has been a massive part of my reading, absolutely. But there have been lots of others. And when I think about it, the number of fantasy novels and short stories and series that I love in that way, with that intensity, is much shorter than the number of science fiction novels and short stories and series books, but it's much more intense. So I would probably go with fantasy. Question number 3, poetry or prose? Prose. Poetry is for hosers. Question number 4, Hemingway or Fitzgerald? This is a divide that comes up a lot on Dude Bro channels, and it's also come up a lot on Strip Cover Lit, and just once, I would like at least a tacit acknowledgement that the world is not split into those two camps. Hemingway or Fitzgerald. The world is not split into those two camps. Writing at the exact same time that Hemingway and Fitzgerald were two infinitely better authors. infinitely better, so that their third-rate novel is every bit as good as The Sun Also Rises or The Great Gatsby. I'm of course talking about Edith Wharton and Virginia Woolf. Why isn't it ever Wharton or Woolf? So why is it always Hemingway or Fitzgerald? Anyway, if I have to choose between these two virtually indistinguishable male dude bro authors, I would pick Fitzgerald. I think when he's when he's really, really good, which happens very rarely and happens just as rarely as it happens when that Hemingway will be on and really, really good. Both of them achieved greatness in pogo stick peaks, when they were temporarily off the alcohol, when they were temporarily at peace with the woman that they were temporarily cheating on their wives with. During those temporary little windows, these two guys could write really good prose. And the reason that I'm stressing that is because Virginia Woolf and Edith Wharton didn't have that. There aren't any pogo sticks. They're brilliant right across the board. Because they weren't acting like overgrown boys the whole time. Anyway, during those isolated moments, I think Fitzgerald is a little stronger than Hemingway. But just once, I would like to see this question shift over to somewhere else. To somewhere else. You know, when people say, "Oh yeah, the great sitcoms of the 90s, boy oh boy," they don't talk about the 7th rated sitcom. They talk about the big two. Anyway, let's see here. Question number 5: fiction or nonfiction? Nonfiction. Fiction? I like it fine. I like it fine. But well, now I'm going to move him over here. But he's a little confused. I wonder why he's confused. I don't know. What's that again? We're going to a movie at 10? Okay, and I should be getting ready. Oh God! All right. Why is he confused? He has autism. Okay, let's go. Oh, and 2 weeks later, when you get around to it, when you're done with your cocaine binges, and when your agent's asking about that last advance payment, when you get around to looking at notes again, the stuff that you pulled out of your tuchus, I see a note here that he's autistic. Maybe I should research that. 20 minutes of Googling later. Okay, research done. Nonfiction. Thanks, nonfiction. Let's see here. Question number 6: Harry Potter or The Hunger Games? The Hunger Games. Absolutely. Absolutely. The Hunger Games. Harry Potter features a bunch of privilege young members of a privileged overclass. Basically, the ruling class of the British Raj, who are at the top of their pecking order, and below them are subordinates and also outright slaves. The Hunger Games, it's all slaves fighting against that. Fighting against that. They're not fighting to see who becomes headmaster of that world. Who gets to rule that world, and then later in comfortable middle age send their kids off to also rule that world. It isn't about the Raj. The Hunger Games is about overthrowing that whole system, so it gets my vote. Although I should point out that in both cases, the plotting, the writing, the pacing, the characterization is abysmal. Just abysmal in both cases. So, but I would say The Hunger Games. Also, they're a lot more entertaining to read, I think, on just a page-by-page level. I know that's total heresy. Quite a few of you are Potter kids, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. I love the phenomenon of Potter kids a lot more than I love the novels that made them that. So I'm willing to take my lumps. Question number 7: classic or modern? Speaking of taking lumps, I wouldn't be a strip cover lit tag if I didn't blast strip cover lit at one point or another. This seems like as good a time as any to do it. In Dalton's answer to this question, he says, "Yeah, I know we take a lot of crap on this channel for only reading old stuff." I want to point out, I was as big a fan of Strip Cover Lit as anybody. I sing their praises all the time. I will leave a link to their channel down below, of course, because I'll be linking to Dalton's tag. But I'll also say what I always say when their name comes up, which is that they want this to be a going concern. They want their channel to be an actual gig, and you should help them. If you watch their videos and enjoy their content, you should think about subscribing. You know, ponying up $1, $5 on Patreon. if it's a small enough amount so that you won't miss it, but it accumulates when you have a Patreon, or so I've been told. And anything that would help them to do this more regularly, more often, especially if it's tags for Steve, is to the good. Nevertheless, despite the fact that I sing their praises all day long, I have to point out that Adrian and Dalton have never, in fact, talked about anything old on their channel. Okay? All right? If the body is still relatively warm, then it's not an old book. Adrian and Dalton hardly ever, I'm having a hard time even remembering one time that they have ever ventured past the 20th century. I'm having a hard time remembering the poetry, yes, but in terms of analyzing a work of prose, off the top of my head, I'm having a hard time remembering that. And they certainly wouldn't go back any further than the 18th century. So I want to stress, when Dalton says that when he sort of wearily says that on their channel they only talk about old stuff, age is relative. Age is just a number. But when it comes to my answer to the question, it's tough. It's one of the tougher. Dalton says in his version of the tag that these questions get tougher as they go along, and some of them do. And for me, this is a tough one because I am deeply enamored of the new stuff that's coming out every year. Seeing what authors are trying seeing what angles are being dusted off or invented. I feel like I'm just sort of watching all this stuff fly at me, and as much experience as I have with analyzing it all and sensing patterns and remembering what every author has done, I am surprised every day. Anyway, and I love that. Absolutely love that. But there have been huge chunks of my life where I read only old stuff, only rereads, and was as happy as a clam to do that. So I guess I'll sort of cop out on my answer and just locate it temporally. I'll say now my answer would definitely be modern. And by modern, I mean new. New books. New books would be my answer now. That could change. Could change even in a lifetime of this channel. You never know. You never know. Let's see here. Question number 8. Reading or writing? See what I mean? These do get harder. For me, it's going to have to be reading. But boy, oh boy, it's not easy. That's not an easy answer. Those of you, I am occasionally nagging at those of you who have not sat down and started to write the way you want to. Maybe you've been thinking, I've always wanted to try my hand at writing, and I occasionally nag you to say you don't have all the time in the world. There's a cyst growing inside you right now. There's a bus out there with your name on it. There's a Yellowstone super caldera that could erupt and kill us all. That you really ought to get to it. You really ought to get to it. The reason that I do that will be known to the people who out there who do write, which is that there's just no describing the feeling. There just isn't this. There isn't any describing the feeling. It is incredible. Not maybe at the beginning, but once you've that little voice inside your head that is ruthlessly honest with you at all times. That voice, for a long time when you start to write, no matter what it is that you're writing, is going to say, you're a loser. You're a toad with a wart on your forehead. What are you doing? Why are you even bothering? But there's going to come a day. If you do it, if you keep at it, there's going to come a day when that little voice says, yeah, that was good. That was good. You're going to know that. You might have your moments of egotism, or you might be prone to self-doubt, but that voice at some point is going to say, okay, some of this you are getting the hang of. You start to know how to do this. Now, if you do a lot of it, that feeling again, there will be moments of egotism. I'm not talking about those, but that moment, those moments when the voice in the back of your head says, without any delusion, says, okay, that's pretty good. Those moments, I cannot describe the joy. It's not even joy. It's deeper than that. It's a feeling that rivals reading. And I think that's where this question must come from. I would love to hear, it was Dalton that did the tag, but I would love to hear Adrian for it. As Dalton mentions in his tag, Adrian is really the writer of the pair. I would love to hear Adrian talk about that, because he must have felt it. I have felt it, and I have no talent. And boy, oh boy, when you feel that feeling when you're in the middle of a novel, and suddenly you're not pushing a rock uphill anymore, you're pushing a rock, suddenly the sled is starting to go down that hill. Oh. Those of you who haven't tried it, you should try it. Everyone should feel that. It's been compared by many writers to what it must feel like to be a god. I can see that. I really can. In just a little while, around August, I'm going to start to yearn for NaNoWriMo. And it's for that feeling. I'm yearning for that feeling. Anyway, where have we got here? Okay, question number 8 is a little trippy. You have a choice. You can either have unlimited reading time, but you don't get to pick the book. The books are picked by someone else. Or you can have only an hour of reading every day, but the book is your choice. And I would have to go with the first one. I think the second one will probably be the answer that most people have to this question, but I couldn't do with only an hour of reading a day. I couldn't do it. I'm willing to yield, especially if there are books, if the books that are being assigned to me during the day are things that I don't know about. Who knows what I might find? I think I'd rather go with that. If I had to, I'd rather go with that. And question number 10. Oh my God. Adrian Fort or Dalton Gentry? I don't have an easy way out of this, BookTube. The last time I answered this question, I think this showed up on the 52 Nifty Questions tag that Adrian did. And my answer then was that it depends. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to weasel out and say once again that my answer is it depends. It depends on what I'm going for, on what I want. You know, a really tough critic of something that I wrote, where I wanted really tough criticism, I might go to Adrian Fort. An entertaining night of really stimulating, engaged conversation, maybe Dalton Gentry. But that also could change from day to day. So I don't really know. I don't think it's possible to choose between Adrian Fort and Dalton Gentry. That's the whole point of Strip Cover Lit. But anyway, that is the BookTube Endgame Tag. In his video, Dalton looked a little like he was wishing that he was one of the people who was Thanos snapped away. But as long as the tabs keep coming, Steve will be happy. And all that's left for me to do is tag people. And oh my God, the list of people that I want to hear these answers from is enormous. I wrote down just a few names. Of course, Mark at Richardson Reads, I want to hear your answers to these. And also Todd the Librarian, who I don't think I've ever tagged you before. And I'd love to hear your answers to these. But also, just recently in your subscription feeds, I'm sure a lot of you will have seen that just recently Jennifer, Insert Literary Pun here, did a hilarious video about just rambling about books. And it occurred to me, I mean, one of the reasons that she doesn't make videos anymore is because she's socked with work. When you're working at the galley slave level of the New York publishing world, your time is not your own. Another reason was maybe that she was thinking, now that I'm out, that she's actually in the publishing world representing authors, talking to other people who represent other authors, maybe I'm not quite as free as I used to be to talk about books, specific books, especially new releases. But I don't see why you couldn't do this tag. You could certainly do this tag. This tag wouldn't be hard at all. And of course I tag Britta. We wouldn't want her to have no tags to do, now would we? So there you go. That was the Endgame Tag. Though I want to thank Dalton for tagging me, even though he made it sound a little bit involuntary. And I also want to urge all of you to go and see Avengers Endgame. OMG. OMG. I want you to go and see Avengers Endgame. The greatest Marvel movie of them all so far, I think. And that's tough. As far as I'm concerned, the Captain America movies really give the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe a run for their money. And so to say that anything is better than the first Captain America movie, especially the last 15 minutes of the first Captain America movie, or Captain America Civil War, to say that anything is better than those feels almost traitorous. And one of the ways it makes it a little easier to do is because in a very real way, Avengers Endgame points out to you that the whole of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's often said that the whole of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least the main DNA running throughout it, has been one long Iron Man movie. Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark Iron Man. The whole of it is really his story. And certainly the showrunners, the writers, and the directors for Avengers Endgame must have had that in mind, considering all the events that happen in the movie. But I'd like to think also that this whole arc has also been Captain America's story, Steve Rogers' story. And Endgame really brings that home as well. And in a way, I kind of like the fact that no one ever thinks that this is Thor's story. Because Thor has pointed out there's that wonderful moment that he has in the previous Avengers movie. I think it was the previous Avengers movie. That wonderful moment that he has with Rocket, where he's just talking about his life, and it's not the kind of moment that you usually get in the comic book Thor, who's very much a creature of the moment. But nevertheless, you should get it, because in that moment, in I believe it was the Avengers Infinity War, you realize that the Avengers, all of this, the Hulk, Thor, Natasha Romanoff, Ultron, all of this is just one adventure in a life that has spanned centuries and will span more centuries. So I kind of like the fact that it's not really Thor's story. We get a lot that happens to him, but as far as an arc that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, it seems more appropriate that it would be Iron Man and Captain America. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now, because if I start talking about Avengers Endgame, even without spoilers, I'll talk for hours. So just go and see it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.